How unlucky do you have to be to survive one atomic bomb, only to be caught in another 3 days later? For Tsutomu Yamaguchi, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was his reality. August 6th, Hiroshima. August 9th, Nagasaki. 2 cities, 2 bombs, 1 survivor. The morning of August 6th, 1945, started like any other day for Tsutomu Yamaguchi. He was 29 years old, a marine engineer working for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. For the past 3 months, he'd been stationed in Hiroshima, designing oil tankers. His assignment was finally complete. Today was his last day. Tomorrow he would board a train back to his home in Nagasaki, back to his wife Hisako and their infant son Katsutoshi. He woke early that morning, gathered his belongings, and prepared for the journey home. The weather was clear, the sky brilliant blue. It was going to be a hot day. Before heading to the train station, he needed to stop by the Mitsubishi shipyard one final time to collect some documents and say goodbye to colleagues. At approximately 8 a.m., Tsutomu left his lodging and began walking toward the shipyard. The streets of Hiroshima were alive with morning activity. People heading to work, children walking to school, shopkeepers opening their stores. It was an ordinary morning in an ordinary city. Nobody knew that in 15 minutes, everything would change forever. At 8:15 a.m., Tsutomu was about 3 kilometers from the city center when he realized he'd forgotten something. He turned back. That's when he saw it. A B-29 bomber, high in the sky, glinting in the sunlight. It wasn't unusual. American planes had been flying over Japan for months, but something felt different about this one. Then came the flash. A light so bright it seemed to split the sky open. Brighter than the sun, brighter than anything Tsutomu had ever seen. For a fraction of a second, he was blinded, his vision consumed by pure white light. Then the heat arrived. A wall of searing, burning air that hit him like a physical force. His skin ignited. His face, his arms, the left side of his body. The pain was instant and overwhelming. Then the blast wave. The shock wave threw him into the air like a rag doll. He flew backward, tumbling, crashing into the ground with bone-shattering force. His ears were ringing. He couldn't see. He couldn't hear. He couldn't think. The world had become chaos. When his senses began to return, Tsutomu found himself lying in a ditch. Smoke and dust filled the air, so thick he could barely breathe. Slowly, painfully, he pulled himself up and looked around. What he saw was impossible to comprehend. Hiroshima was gone. The city he'd been walking through moments ago had vanished. Buildings were flattened. Fires burned everywhere. The sky had turned black, and in the distance, rising above it all, was a massive cloud, shaped like a mushroom, climbing higher and higher into the atmosphere. Tsutomu staggered to his feet. His body screamed in agony. His left arm was badly burned. His face felt like it was on fire. His eardrums had burst from the blast, leaving him partially deaf. But he was alive. Around him, others were not so fortunate. Bodies lay in the streets. People wandered aimlessly, their skin hanging from their bodies like melted wax, crying out for water. He knew he had to get out. He had to get home. He stumbled through the ruins, stepping over debris and bodies, moving like a man in a nightmare. The heat from the fires was suffocating. Ash fell from the sky like snow. The smell of burning flesh filled his nostrils. Somehow, through sheer willpower, Tsutomu made it to a shelter where survivors were gathering. A makeshift medical station had been set up. There were no real doctors, no medicine, just people trying to help each other. Someone wrapped his burns in cloth. Someone else gave him water. He spent the night there, in shock, unable to process what had happened. The next morning, despite his injuries, Tsutomu made a decision. He had to go home. He had to get to Nagasaki. His wife and child were there. They needed to know he was alive. So he dragged himself to the train station. The journey was a blur of pain and confusion. The train was packed with injured survivors, all heading away from Hiroshima. The burns on his body throbbed with every movement. His vision was still blurred, but he kept going. After a long, agonizing trip, the train finally pulled into Nagasaki on August 8th. Tsutomu stumbled off the train and made his way home. When Hisako saw him, she screamed. His face was swollen and burned. His clothes were torn and bloodied. He looked like he'd crawled out of hell. She immediately began treating his wounds as best she could, wrapping him in fresh bandages, giving him food and water. But Tsutomu couldn't rest. The next morning, August 9th, despite his wife's protests, he insisted on going to the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki. He needed to report what had happened. He needed to tell his superiors about the weapon that had destroyed Hiroshima. At the office, he sat down with his department manager and began describing the attack. He spoke about the blinding flash, the heat, the explosion that leveled an entire city in seconds. His manager listened with skepticism. The story seemed impossible. One bomb, destroy an entire city? It had to be exaggerated. "You're mistaken," the manager said. "No single bomb could cause that much destruction." Tsutomu tried to explain, but the manager wasn't convinced. They argued back and forth, Tsutomu insisting on what he'd witnessed, the manager dismissing it as trauma-induced confusion. Then, at exactly 11:02 a.m., the room filled with light. The same blinding white light Tsutomu had seen 3 days ago. For a split second, he couldn't believe it. Not again. It couldn't be happening again. But it was. The flash was followed by the heat, then the blast. The windows of the office shattered inward, glass exploding across the room. Tsutomu threw himself to the floor as the building shook violently. Desks flew through the air. Walls cracked. The ceiling began to collapse. When the shaking stopped, Tsutomu pulled himself up. His ears were ringing again. Dust filled the air. Through the broken windows, he could see it. The mushroom cloud, rising over Nagasaki just like it had risen over Hiroshima. It had happened again. Another atomic bomb. And once again, Tsutomu Yamaguchi had survived. This time, he was closer to the blast, only about 3 kilometers from ground zero. His existing burns reopened. New injuries covered his body. But miraculously, impossibly, he was still alive. Tsutomu fought his way through the devastated streets back to his home. His wife and son were alive, sheltered in the wreckage of their house. They held each other, 3 survivors in a city of death, unable to comprehend what had just happened. In the days that followed, Japan surrendered. The war was over. But for Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the nightmare was just beginning. The radiation poisoning started to take hold. His hair fell out. He vomited constantly. His burns became infected. For weeks, he teetered on the edge of death. But he survived. Against all odds, his body fought off the radiation sickness. The burns slowly healed, leaving deep scars. His hearing partially returned. Month by month, he recovered. Tsutomu lived with the physical and psychological scars of the bombings for the rest of his life. For decades, he rarely spoke about his experience. The trauma was too deep, the memories too painful. But in his later years, he became an advocate for nuclear disarmament, sharing his story with the world, warning future generations about the horrors of atomic weapons. In 2009, at the age of 93, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was officially recognized by the Japanese government as a Niju Hibakusha, a double bomb survivor. He is the only person in history to be officially certified as surviving both atomic bomb attacks. He passed away on January 4th, 2010, at the age of 93, from stomach cancer likely caused by radiation exposure. But before he died, he left a powerful message. The only people who should be allowed to govern countries with nuclear weapons are mothers, those who are still breastfeeding their babies. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's story is not just about survival. It's about the resilience of the human spirit, the will to live even when faced with the unthinkable, and the importance of bearing witness to history's darkest moments so that they are never repeated. 2 atomic bombs, 2 cities destroyed. One man who lived through both and spent the rest of his life fighting to ensure it never happens again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories of human resilience and survival. Thanks for watching.